Welcome to Talking Industrial Automation, a podcast where you get to know the people who make modern industrial automation possible. You will get to hear from CSIA system integrators and industry partners to get a better understanding of how they help their clients solve process challenges and how they've earned success in their careers. Along the way, we will touch on system integration best practices, technology, trends, and challenges. Whether you are a manufacturer, end user, supplier, or system integrator, you will enjoy the insights these industry professionals bring to this podcast. Let's get started. Hi, my name is Lisa Richter, the host of Talking Industrial Automation, a podcast where you get to know the people who make modern industrial automation and processing possible. In today's episode, we're doing some new things. For starters, this is a bonus episode. That is, it's extra content that we were able to bring you because of a generous sponsor, Aveva. Aveva is a global leader in industrial software, driving digital transformation and sustainability. By connecting the power of information and artificial intelligence with human insight, Aveva enables teams to use their data to unlock new value. The other thing we're going to try today is having two guests from the same company, which means we're talking industrial automation with Josh Riley and Luke Stephenson, both with Enterprise Automation. EA provides automation consulting and system integration services from its headquarters in Irvine, California. Josh and his business partner, Scott Pickford, purchased Enterprise Automation in 2006 and have been equal partners since that time. Both have been in the controls and automation industry for over 2 decades. Josh oversees the day-to-day functional aspects of EA and provides CEO leadership for cross-departmental collaboration and alignment. His most active roles involve heavy account management of large existing clients and distributors and key manufacturer and distributor partnerships at the executive level, as well as development of management staff. As business manager for Enterprise Automation, Luke is responsible for the broad portfolio of projects and clients they serve. In addition, his responsibilities include identifying and educating new partners and prospective clients and helping them reach their corporate objectives through the effective use of automation tools. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Hey, Lisa. Thanks for having us.
Why don't we start by getting a little more background on EA? How did it begin and how has it evolved?
So EA actually started back in 1998. Dave Panish was the owner. I was employee number 2. So myself, Bill Alexander, and Dave was the whole company and had an interesting beginning. We primarily worked for one single client, hydrogen burner technology. They were making a really cool technology. It was a reformer that could take natural gas and make hydrogen. And then you'd pair that with a fuel cell to make electricity. What was cool about it, though, was that they were trying to make it about the size of an air conditioner that you could stick on the side of your house so everybody could have one of these on the side of their house. I think 75-80% of our business was through them at the time. They were heavily investor-driven. And during 9/11, 7 of the top 15 investors passed away in those buildings. So we actually went for hydrogen burner technology. They were getting $2 million a month of funding. It fell to $1 million, $500,000, and they were out of business, which left EA with a rather large unpaid bill, which put Dave under a lot of stress at the time. He took out some personal loans and basically got us through it. But it meant that the company transformed. We had to go out and sell differently and do things differently. And then in 2005 is when my business partner, Scott, joined the company. We really wanted to hire him because of his sales capabilities, and it showed up right away. And Scott and I wanted to grow the business. And Dave, through that experience with HBT, was a bit more risk adverse. And so we had some good conversations and ended up with Scott and I purchasing the business in late 2006. And from there, we've grown the business. So late 2006, it was Scott, myself, and Derek, one of my current managers, and that was it. So we are now about 35 people. We've grown about 18% a year on average, revenue-wise. Our company has become a nice, strong automation and industrial consultant.
Yeah, it's pretty neat to focus on the beginning. I'll just kind of mention, Lisa, to your question about how we've evolved. We serve, like many industrial automation companies, we serve multiple industries. But we've really evolved into two client types, and we actually do quite a bit differently. There's some crossover, but we have our public clients, so a lot in water, wastewater, and government-based clients, and then our private clients or people that are not government-based. And there's vast differences between the two, how they procure, how they behave. The values of both groups tend to be pretty different from our point of view. And so we've really evolved into almost two sub-organizations that serve both of those client bases. And we'll get into a little bit of that in a little bit later. But that's a big evolution that's occurred over the last decade since, Josh and Scott bought the business. Trying to find those clients that we match up really well with has kind of led us into those two subgroups.
It's interesting to hear your origin story involved 9/11 because, gosh, who knew? I mean, bad things happened and it affected a lot of lives, but all those ripple effects that I just wasn't really thinking about. So thank you for sharing that. Super interesting to know that. So getting back to our scripted questions here, what suppliers do you work with? Are you certified or endorsed with any you'd like to mention?
Yeah, certainly. We work with all the major automation suppliers, software, hardware. So Aveva, Schneider Electric are big ones for us, Rockwell, Siemens, again, fill in a lot of what we do. Fortunately for us, we've been really lucky to be an endorsed systems integrator with Aveva on the Aveva side. So that's their highest tier of recognized partnership with an integrator. And it's invitation only. So there's a lot of demonstrated capability that we have gone through. And there's a vetting process there and a number of certified people within our staff that we have to maintain. But then that sets us up to be really strongly aligned with their product portfolio and the client base that they seek to serve. So that's on the Aveva side. And with the Wonderware product lines, their control product lines. And then on the Schneider side, we've worked with Schneider as a close partner for a long period of time, coming up through their certification and partnership program. And currently we're the only Alliance Master partner in the United States. I think they have 16 globally. And so at those two, the Schneider, for those in industrial automation will know that Aveva and Schneider are very closely related now that one owns 60% of the other. We're the only integrator in the world that possesses those two top tier invitation only certification or partnership statuses. So we're really proud of that. We use that to get a lot of business and hopefully really affect positive outcomes within our clients.
What challenges are your customers facing now?
I always think of this one kind of like essentially when we start working with a client, what does it look like? Because to me, that's the initiation of this whole challenge phase. And I think it always starts out simple. They're going to have the typical problems. They might not have great source control, change control. They have a problem with a PLC. Their SCADA system isn't super stable. They have those types of problems. Where I think the real challenge for them, though, is where we come into play, just trying to get them to establish some really good long-term goals, some long-term planning. I always think of this kind of like doing your retirement planning. Nobody ever really wants to do it, but it's the thing that's needed for you to get to the outcome you want. And so we spend a lot of time learning what our clients want from a long-term goals perspective so that we can just inch our way forward to those goals. Part of that that's always very difficult for them is procurement. And one of the things this long-term planning does is we can establish budgets and make it so they can predict what's going to happen, get buy-in from management, that sort of thing. So yeah, I always think of the long-term planning is typically the hardest one to get them to actually do and to get through.
So you talked a little bit about your clients' challenges. So I imagine that informs how you approach a project. So talk to me a little bit about what's unique about how you approach a project.
I'll kind of go back to what I was mentioning in the beginning, kind of how we had these two market segments, the public, which is primarily water and wastewater for us, and then the private. And so within the water wastewater community or the project work that gets let out in that industry, I think it gets a bad rap because it's typically low bid. So integrators that are vying for that work are going and finding it by working with electrical subcontractors or maybe a general contractor, who's going to win or obtain a project based on being the lowest price provider of that project's cost. And so that creates, both the being down the chain from the customer, right? So you have the end customer who hires a general, who hires an electrical sub, and then the integrator gets put in their group. So that disconnection from the end user is not ideal. Plus, they're coming in late to the design of the system. It's already been put together or sort of created, and then they just have to build it. And then in addition, they're competing on winning that work based on the low price. So whenever that's a factor in the decision, the only factor in the decision-making process, it tends to drive what we feel are lost value. Hey, this would be really good for the end customer, but we can't throw it in there because if we do, our competitors won't, and we'll lose the opportunity. So for us, what we've decided to do, being that that's 75% of our work, we don't do any low bid based work. We don't find our opportunities or projects that way. We have a strong system for engaging directly with end users. So we go to the water, wastewater, county, district, authority, and speaking to them, kind of like Josh mentioned, hey, let's plan for your retirement. And the analogy would be, how do we plan for your automation needs long term? What do you see yourselves doing as an entity serving the public? And those types of messages typically resonate really well with them. And then we find out how to get involved with them directly. And a lot of that, like Josh mentioned earlier, is procurement can be tricky in those areas, but we have ways to educate and tools to provide them references and resources that we can point them to. And ultimately what that does is it gets us engaged with them directly, which is great for us. We get to work with them, say, is this valuable for you? Should we work this in? Can we budget for this? Where does it fit into the 3-5 year plan? And then ultimately get to execute that. So I think that's really unique about the way the EA goes about it. And then a lot of that transfers over into that other market, that private industry segment. We're still engaged directly with the end users. That tends to be a little more common there, which is why I think a lot of integrators prefer those industries. They like working with end users. A lot easier to get things done.
So I was going to cover a different aspect of this, which is a little bit more of a specific method that we go about doing this. And the first part we've already kind of talked about. When we get to know these clients, one of the first things we try and do is get true goals out of them. It's not unusual to be talking to the GM, the assistant GM, and the private side. This would be a CEO, CFO. Let's understand where you guys are really driving towards. What do you want? Sometimes that requires planning that is like, we may need to restructure how the entire SCADA system is managed by a company. After we do that, though, we do a whole lot to interview the client to find out what their preferences are. We know that when these things come together, there's a team. So there's going to be us, the integrator. There's going to be the client. And then there's typically two other entities. There's some sort of internal or external design consultant doing the heavy civil, mechanical, electrical. And then there's eventually going to be a general and electrical contractor. We talk about how's that team going to get formed? What is it going to look like? What are the responsibilities? Now, once we get past that, we create what we call the instrumentation, control, and electrical standards. I'm going to give a real simple example. We're going to talk to them about a valve. How do you want your valves to work? What I/O are they going to have? And it sounds so simple, but the outcome from doing it is really big. We take this information and we teach it to the design consultant. We then check all of the design consultants' work. So we're actually taking real standards and we're not only asking for them to be done, we're making sure they get done. Now, the outcome from that is kind of a couple, let's just take some simple things. One is when you talk about standardized programming, now you actually get to reuse your standardized programs because you don't have consultant A making a valve work one way, consultant B another way. We get true consistency. Well, that carries through in all aspects. That makes testing faster. That makes commissioning faster. Everything gets more cost effective. The big one is operator training. We get to train the operators how it works. And when they get their next section of the plant, it works the same. The end goal to this, though, is kind of the bigger piece, which is by getting this base level of standardization, we're then able to bring a client through the common terminology now, their digital transformation. If you have that base built, that allows us to do the reporting, the contextualization, the AI, the digital twin concept. All these things can come together because we've built it the right way. We're not trying to tack it on afterwards. So anyways, that's one of the methods we're using to get these outcomes for our clients.
I attended Rockwell Automation Fair in the before times, and one young man came up to me to compliment me about the podcast, which is really nice. But so I asked him, like, what do you want me to ask these people when I'm talking to them? And what topics would you like? He's like, maintenance. Do these guys ever think about maintenance when they're building this stuff?
Yeah, I mean,
It's a good question. Yeah.
It is. Part of our standard is that we build these maintenance screens. If you can picture like an actual I/O rack, we draw it on the screen for the maintenance team, and it has truly the 4 to 20 milliamp and the scaling so that they don't have to get their meter out. They can look at the SCADA screens and do it. It's thinking through lockout, tagout at the SCADA level or calibration at the SCADA level. And in our tool set, we teach our clients, hey, your life could be better if you think about these things.
And in addition to that, because of our go-to-market or that we're engaged with clients longer term rather than just a project, our staff is really incentivized to think that way because they're the ones that inherit some of those gripes and complaints if they don't think about that well enough, because when the project ends, there's another 2 or 3 years left typically on our contract where we're continuing to help them do other things. So we don't want to inherit those problems either.
So how much of your business is repeat and why do you think they come back?
I mean, a lot of our business is repeat, actually. I think that's kind of the holy grail, but certainly a high goal or expectation is that if you're going to take the time to obtain clients, right, the acquisition cost is typically where most of your time is spent. You certainly don't want to let them get away after the project concludes or after an engagement concludes. So about 80 to 85% of our business is repeat. And I'll kind of throw in as well how we define that. So when we chase a customer, we're going after a client, once they place a purchase order with us or place an order, project, help, service, anything like that, the first 12 months following that, any orders they place, we consider new client business. So if Pepsi comes along and has a line upgrade and they hire us and, then for the next 12 months, we get 2 or 3 POs, we consider all of that new client business when we book revenue. At the 12-month mark and forward, that becomes existing client business. So we kind of monitor that. So about 80 to 85% of our revenue is with customers after the first 12 months, and then it's usually repeat. Some customers have been with us for 10, 15 plus years. So that's always a great compliment in and of itself. If they stick around that long, they don't have a gun to their head. They don't have to do that. It's letting us know that they see value in what they're getting and what they're doing with us.
I'll add, and some of that with these long-term relationships with municipalities, which if the people listening understand the procurement processes, that means that they've gone to bat for us multiple times. And yeah, it's really an endorsement of both them and our relationship.
Are you interested in the latest products and services for system integration? Maybe you buy them. Maybe you sell them. Either way, CSIA has you covered. We're launching 2 new member benefits for system integrators and industry partners to really shine this year. The first is Innovation for Integration, a new semi-annual EPUB for CSIA members to share the industry's newest offerings at a glance. The second new member benefit will get CSIA members in front of the trade press. It's a quarterly news release letting editors know your unique value proposition or special sauce. Of course, these are in addition to the many other membership benefits you unlock when you join. Now is the perfect time to sign up because we've put together a special bundle of benefits for first-timers, including mid-year discounts. Learn more at www.controlsys.org/shine. What are you waiting for? Your future is so bright, you gotta wear shades. Yikes, who writes this copy anyway? How has EA grown or changed in the past year, and what do you expect for the next 12 to 24 months?
I thought about this a bit, and in the end, COVID was probably the biggest impact in the last year. And it wasn't COVID caused any issue for the business of any type. It was more about the fact that we are a company that works in our office together as a team, collaborating. A big part of our culture is that collaboration. So literally on a Wednesday being told you're all going to go home and work from home, we were very unsure of how's this going to go medium term, long term. And it turned out that the culture side was so strong, it worked really well. The only real challenge to it was we hired 5 new engineers straight out of college in July. So you can kind of imagine you got 5 new people. How are you going to get them to be part of the culture when you've got everybody on Zoom and Teams? We even asked the whole company, and it was so interesting, the varying questions. I asked somebody who's been with us for 5 years, how is it working at home? And they're like, it's the same. This is great. I'm great. You ask the new guys, and they're like, wow, we feel so disconnected. So we did a lot to refine how we work together, get that collaboration, obviously learning how to do fun events remotely, that sort of thing. So yeah, that was definitely the biggest challenge over the last year. I think the next 12 to 24 months, a lot of this is going to fall on Luke. we're trying to grow. We're trying to grow faster than we ever have. And you've got a company that is owned and run by engineers who are trying to get really good at sales. I always laugh as I'm in Vistage and I get to see different companies and how they grow. And you take somebody who starts a company who's a salesperson and you get this incredible amount of sales coming in and their operations is a bit of a disaster. We're the other way around. We've got the engineering absolutely nailed and the sales thing is something that we're learning and progressing. And it's going well. We're growing well, but that's definitely the biggest challenge.
Going back to your comment about onboarding, particularly entry level, people who are first time having the job. I experienced that. My daughter got her first job while she was living at home because of the pandemic. And I'm basically onboarding her, because she's got all these questions, like basic questions that you forget you didn't know, but it's so intrinsic to what you do right now. And so it's been such an interesting experiment for families to get to see each other's other side. You can see how your wife handles herself with her colleagues, and you can see how your daughter's handling herself for her first time job. I mean, that's just not how we were set up before that. So one of those byproducts of the pandemic that I find kind of awesome, actually, that we're getting to know our family members on such a completely different level.
Because we hire straight out of college, we have a pretty thorough program. We call it EA University. So last year it was 5 guys who started. We actually had 3 more start last week, and it's 2 women and a guy. But we ended up doing it in person, socially distanced. And it's a 5-week program. And it's all about systems, method, culture. And oh yeah, we'll teach you to program. Because we're hiring really smart engineers. It's all about systems, methods, and culture. And they were quite funny. So they had to wear masks the whole time. They had to socially distance. And every time we have a new EAU, they come up with a name. So their name was the Masked Men. And anyways, it was really good that we had that in place, Lisa, because without that, I just can't even imagine what it'd be like bringing people on and trying to get them up to speed and not having those systems. It'd be brutal.
We do these easy stats here at CSIA, which just kind of takes a quick pulse of where people are at, system integrators are at. And one of the questions we did recently was, do you want to keep working from home? And we were kind of surprised by the results because we assumed that it would be the young people, the digital natives who wanted to stay remote.
It's the opposite.
Yeah.
We see the same thing here.
So what advice would you give to a prospective customer researching automation/controls engineers or system integrators?
So our answer would probably be pretty unique. Take an EA flavor, which I guess is the intent why you had us on today. But products are great. Certainly products solve a myriad of issues and can present, the right tool for the job. But we at least feel that most products are pretty capable, right? And what introduces more variability or undesirable project outcomes is implementation. So maybe that's no surprise coming from a systems integrator. But if someone came to us and said, hey, it's got to be this technology, it's got to be this technology, other than a very few, that's going to work. We can make that work. Are there going to be pros and cons? Certainly. So we would say definitely make sure you have an understanding of who's going to be doing the implementation. And do you have a high level of trust or faith in their capability? And I'll get into that in a little bit more. But the second thing would be use a show and tell evaluation method. I think it's really difficult. Doesn't matter what we're doing, whether we're trying to find someone to cut our hair or a dentist, to understand if they're going to provide the level of service that we want. We can ask them, do you do a good job? Yes, I do a good job. I always do a good job. But how do you know that? And so I think spend the time to understand what show and tell looks like. If it's a systems integrator, can I see some test documentation for the last project you did? If they can produce that very quickly, you can look at it and see that it wasn't written in chicken scratch. You're probably headed in a pretty good direction. So come up with some sort of show and tell methodology. And then I think the third thing for us would be their hiring practices are your hiring practices. Whoever they staff your project with or their company with, they end up being the extension of staff to get your project done. So do a little bit of digging into how they find talent, how they replace talent. We get a lot of feedback from clients who are, maybe frustrated is too strong a word, but they're, hey, the last project was going well while I had Mary on the project, but then Mary left the company and then I was stuck with Bob, and it was a night and day different experience. One of the things we pride ourselves on is finding really great talent. And while there's always differences in people's ability or experience, creating that sort of team-based level playing field so our customers can say, you know what, as long as EA shows up, I'm taken care of, and we'll deploy the right resources and make sure they're supported. So I would say products are great, but make sure you really put an emphasis on implementation. Even I would say choose your integrator before you choose your product if you're in that position. Use a show and tell based method. So how can you see that the work that they're doing is actually what they say they do? And then look into their hiring practices. Make sure that they're hiring great people, that you can count on the people that are going to be assigned to your projects.
So you covered a lot of it. Good advice for how customers should go about choosing a system integrator. Is there anything you'd like to add?
To go along with that, certainly qualifications. I talked about it earlier, but we definitely feel like putting too much of an emphasis on price is to your detriment. You know, it might seem like a short-term win or the right thing to do because you have budget and you want to fit this project in now, but you're going to pay for it in the long run if you really don't get the quality you're after or the features you're after, so on and so forth. So qualifications should be a big part of that process. Talk to their client references. So that kind of goes back to that show and tell type idea. Visit their building. You know, this is a simple one, but a lot of people that procure, they're like, come to me, come see my operation. And that's always great. You know, that should be a part of the process, but do the opposite. Go see their building. If you walk in the door and there are boxes piled high right when you walk in and things are not where they should be, or you kind of get a sense that, man, think this is chaos, or, you know, do they really have the right environment to do good work? Again, personal opinion, but we think that that says a lot about what you're probably going to experience over the next 6 to 12 months. So I would just throw those on top of what, you know, kind of tie those into what we mentioned earlier, just qualifications, talk to their references. If you can find people they've done project work for recently and visit their building, see what they're about, see how they conduct themselves.
So EA is a CSIA certified control system integrator. So when somebody asks, why should I choose CSIA certified? What would you tell them?
So Luke's talked quite a bit about, and I have too, about our overall process here. So the actual CSIA certification is something that's just part of our standard sales deck. When we're going out and we're talking to clients, we're talking about it every single time. And it comes back to we're after qualifications-based work. And it doesn't matter, again, whether this is private or public, we're always looking for the qualifications type work. CSIA cert is really simple to understand. In the end, it's saying that not only can you put a project together, but that the businesses run well. So anything from HR to accounting, all of it, it's run well. And at least with the clients that we work with, they see the value in that. And so it's a piece of the differentiator that we use.
Okay, so we're going to completely switch gears now and talk a little bit more personally, I guess. If you couldn't be a system integrator, what career would you choose instead? Josh, you want to go first?
Yes. So Luke really liked this question. I said this one was hard. He has probably a great answer, maybe a little more simplistic. So I'm going to go back to when I was a kid. My parents have some sort of super old video of me in the backyard with PVC pipes and fittings that I got from my dad, putting them together and making water flow through pipes. So I've always loved the process, the engineering side. I'm a chemical engineer. I loved that piece of it. And it was a little later in life that I discovered how much I enjoyed the leadership aspect of the role. My personal motivation in life is to enable myself and others to succeed. So when you ask this question, it's interesting for me just to ponder, but I feel like anywhere where I could see good work by good people that I enjoy being with and helping enable them, I take it. I love the industry, but it's not the piece that actually gets me out of bed in the morning.
Luke, what about you?
Yeah, Josh teed it up for me. I got to have a good answer now because evidently I like this question. So my answer is going to be amazing. You know, I find myself pretty entrepreneurial. So I think if I were to do something else, two answers come to mind. At some point in my life, I'll probably take the leap and do something on my own. I don't know that it'll be the only thing I do, but my wife and I have talked about, you know, owning a restaurant or something like that where we can be a little bit more in the driver's seat and kind of see some of our creative imagination played out where we're a little bit more in control of that there. And so that I think would be really fun. But on the business side of it, so the company that I started with out of college and spent 5-6 years with was an EPC company that had more of the scope of a project responsibility. So they were, you know, obviously EPC, they were doing the feed and design side of things all the way through detailed design and construction. And liking the controls as much as I did, you know, 6 or so years ago, I came over to enterprise. And one of the things that I get, and I think all of us here get frustrated with, is the fact that the scope of what we supply or can control in a project is pretty small. And for as good a job as we do at that piece of the pie or that piece of the puzzle, it is really frustrating sometimes to do your best work and see the project still struggle or be delivered late or not meet the customer's expectations because of something that wasn't in your control. So I think if I were to probably make an industry type transition or do something different, it would be more on that EPC or even like capital investment grade side where it's like, I want to control more of it because I want to see the outcome, successful. So maybe I'm a control freak. I don't know. But
Luke has always enjoyed the puppet strings and making big differences with it. So yes.
But I love what we do. So I don't think I'll be looking. Yeah, integration is a really fun space. I think everybody that's in this industry understands how neat it is to be able to go into so many different facilities and industries and apply what you do and have, again, a pretty big impact, maybe not the biggest impact, but have a really big impact.
All right, guys, I'm going to throw you a curveball here because this next question wasn't in the script. Are you ready? If you could go back in time and sit down with your younger self, what advice would you give him? And I'm going to make Luke go first because I'm going to be nice to Josh and give him a minute to think about it.
Yeah, wow. It's a good question. I've been really fortunate and blessed I don't have a ton of regrets about the path that my career has taken or the people I've met along the way. I mean, Josh and the people at EA being one of those. I met Josh and Derek and Scott over 10 years ago when I started my career at this other company. So they've been a part of my essentially entire professional career. And I think if I could tell my younger self maybe something that would provide benefit, I would start networking and interacting with people a lot earlier. I was fortunate enough with limited interaction to meet Josh and Scott and Derek. Fortunately for my life and my family's life, that's led me down a really positive path and a career that I enjoy with people I love working with. But I think there's probably a lot more that I could have either paid it forward or, even learned other things if I would have started networking earlier. It's only really in the last 2 or 3 years, partly because of my focused role at EA, that I've really started to leverage events and LinkedIn and just different things. Frankly, I'm no pro at it even now, but I think I would start that earlier.
So it's interesting. I think mine kind of overlaps with yours a bit more than I would have expected. You and I've talked about this pretty recently. For a long time, I really thought of myself as an introvert. Hey, I don't really like to hang out with people, this and that. And I've found that just wasn't accurate. That's not what was going on. And what was really going on is I just like being around really interesting people. And when I'm around interesting people, I love the conversation. I love to be out and talking and chatting. And so I kind of wish that I knew that earlier. I think I had a mindset that, again, didn't let me network, didn't let me get to know as many people as I could. And so, yeah, looking back on it, I would have said, change that mindset. That's not right.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Talking Industrial Automation. If you're interested in learning more about Josh Riley, Luke Stephenson, or enterprise automation, you can find them on the Industrial Automation Exchange at www.CSIAexchange.com. If you're interested in learning more about our generous sponsor, Aveva, visit www.aveva.com. Thanks for listening, and thank you, Josh and Luke, for joining me today.
Thank you.
No problem.
If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe in iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also help others find us by leaving a 5-star review and sharing your favorite episodes with colleagues. Thanks for listening to the Talking Industrial Automation podcast. Thanks also to bensound.com and Wistia for the music bumpers. Until next time.